When a super empath sets boundaries, everything in the relationship changes. There is a moment in every super empath's life when something quietly but powerfully shifts. It's not dramatic, it's not loud, there's no argument, no final speech, no slam door. It's simply the moment they decide, I will no longer abandon myself to keep someone else comfortable. And that single decision changes everything. Super empaths love deeply. They notice tone shifts, emotional undercurrents, unspoken needs. They give patience when others give pressure, understanding when others give judgment, and loyalty even when it isn't returned in equal measure. For a long time, their instinct is to fix, to hold, to absorb, to wait. They believe love means enduring. But boundaries aren't walls. Boundaries are clarity. And when a super empath finally sets them, the relationship is forced to reveal its true nature. Because here's the truth. Relationships don't fall apart because of boundaries. They fall apart because of the absence of them. When an empath has no boundaries, they become endlessly available. Their time, energy, forgiveness, and emotional labor are always on offer. And unfortunately, availability without limits often attracts people who consume rather than contribute. So when boundaries finally appear, it feels shocking, not because the boundary is unfair, but because the dynamic depended on the empath having none. Suddenly, the super empath stops over-explaining, stops chasing closure, stops filling in emotional gaps that aren't theirs to fill. They no longer rush to respond just to soothe someone else's anxiety. They pause, they reflect, they choose. And that pause, it's terrifying for someone who benefited from constant access, because boundaries remove the illusion that love can be taken without care. When a super empath sets boundaries, they stop negotiating their worth. They stop accepting half-effort disguised as confusion. They stop interpreting inconsistency as complexity. And most importantly, they stop proving they are enough. They already know it. This is where the relationship reaches a crossroads. If the other person is emotionally mature, they rise. They become more present, more accountable, more intentional. They adjust, not because they're forced to, but because they value the connection. But if the relationship was built on imbalance, something else happens. Resistance appears. You may hear things like, you've changed, or you're being cold, or you're too sensitive now. But what they really mean is, I can no longer access you the way I used to. And that's the point. Boundaries don't punish. They protect. They don't end love. They test it. A super empath setting boundaries isn't withdrawing love. It's redirecting it inward. And that internal shift creates external consequences. The empath becomes grounded instead of reactive, calm instead of anxious, selective instead of available. They no longer chase connection. They evaluate it. And here's the most powerful part. When a super empath sets boundaries, they stop being afraid of loss because they finally understand that losing someone who disrespects their emotional needs is not a loss, it's alignment. This doesn't mean they become hard or closed off. It means they become discerning. Their kindness remains, but it now has a backbone. Their empathy remains, but it's no longer self-sacrificial. Their love remains, but it's no longer unconditional to those who repeatedly cross lines. And that changes everything. The relationship either transforms into something healthier or it collapses under the weight of accountability. Either way, the super empath wins, not because they won the relationship, but because they chose themselves. Boundaries don't make you difficult. They make you clear. And clarity is the foundation of real love. A super empath loves in a way that is instinctive, immersive, and deeply intuitive. They don't just hear words, they feel what sits underneath them. They notice shifts in energy before a sentence is even finished. When someone they care about is overwhelmed, distant, or struggling, the super empath doesn't ask whether it's their responsibility. They automatically step in. Love for them is not a measured exchange. It is a natural outpouring. This depth of feeling is a gift, but without limits, it can quietly turn into a pattern of self-erasure. From an early stage in relationships, super empaths tend to lead with understanding. They give people the benefit of the doubt, often repeatedly. If someone is inconsistent, they search for the reason behind it rather than questioning the behavior itself. If effort is missing, they assume stress, fear, past wounds, or confusion. This emotional intelligence allows them to be compassionate partners, but it also creates a dangerous loophole, one where harmful or neglectful behavior is endlessly explained away instead of addressed. Because super empaths are highly attuned to emotional shifts, they often sense when pulling back might hurt someone. That awareness makes boundaries feel cruel, even when they're necessary. Saying no feels like rejection. Taking space feels like punishment. Expressing needs feels like asking for too much. So instead of drawing lines, the super empath adjusts themselves. They become more flexible, more patient, more available, believing that love means accommodating discomfort, especially someone else's. Over time, this creates a subtle imbalance. The super empath becomes the emotional regulator of the relationship. They soothe tension, initiate, repair, carry difficult conversations, and maintain closeness. Their partner may not even realize how much emotional labor is being done on their behalf. The relationship appears stable, but only because one person is constantly holding it together. What makes this pattern particularly difficult to spot is that super empaths don't give with expectation. They give with hope. They believe that consistency will inspire consistency, that loyalty will invite loyalty, that love will eventually be met with love of equal depth. This belief keeps them invested long after their needs have gone unmet. They tell themselves that if they just remain kind, patient, and present, the other person will rise to the occasion. But availability without limits sends an unspoken message. It teaches others that access to the empath is guaranteed, regardless of effort, awareness, or reciprocity. Texts will always be answered. Emotional support will always be offered. Forgiveness will always come quickly. And while this may not be consciously exploited, it often becomes relied upon. The relationship unconsciously reorganizes itself around the empath's endless giving. As a result, the super empath slowly loses touch with their own needs. They may struggle to identify what they want because their focus has been outward for so long. Fatigue becomes normal. Resentment creeps in quietly, disguised as sadness or confusion. They may feel unseen, unchosen, or emotionally alone, despite being deeply connected to someone. This is the paradox of loving without limits. The more the super empath gives, the less they are felt. Their presence becomes expected rather than cherished. Their emotional availability becomes background noise instead of something valued. Not because they are unworthy, but because boundaries were never established to protect the sacredness of their energy. Eventually, something ends. The super empath begins to question the cost. Not loudly at first, just a quiet realization that love should not require constant self-sacrifice, that care should not be one-directional, that empathy should not come at the expense of self-respect. This internal awareness is the first crack in the pattern, the moment where the super empath begins to understand that loving deeply is not the same as loving endlessly without protection. And that understanding becomes the foundation for change. Boundaries are one of the most misunderstood aspects of any relationship, especially for a super empath. Many people think boundaries are walls meant to keep others out, to punish, or to shut down connection. But for a super empath, boundaries are not about pushing people away. They are about creating clarity and protecting emotional well-being. A boundary is a declaration. This is what I am willing to accept. This is what I am not. It is not a statement of judgment, but of self-respect. Until a super empath fully embraces boundaries, their love often comes at the cost of their own energy, time, and peace of mind. They may give endlessly to others, responding to emotional needs while neglecting their own, believing that to love is to sacrifice completely. Setting a boundary is a radical act for a super empath because it contradicts years of habit. Many empaths are conditioned to prioritize others over themselves, to anticipate needs before they are voiced, and to absorb pain in the hopes of maintaining harmony. Saying no, asserting limits, or expressing personal needs can feel unnatural or even selfish. There is a lingering fear that if they protect themselves, they will be perceived as cold, unkind, or unloving. But boundaries are not a reflection of emotional coldness. They are a reflection of emotional maturity. They teach others how to engage with the empath in a way that is respectful, conscious, and reciprocal. When boundaries are set, the super empath learns that their time and energy are finite, and that protecting them is essential to sustaining healthy relationships. It is a shift from automatic giving to intentional giving. Every gesture, every response, every effort becomes a choice rather than an obligation. The empath begins to evaluate where they invest their emotional energy, who deserves it, and who repeatedly takes it without giving in return. This is not selfishness. It is discernment. It is the acknowledgement that one cannot pour from an empty cup, no matter how deeply they care. Boundaries also clarify expectations within the relationship. They create a framework for how interactions should occur and what behaviors are acceptable. A super empath may establish boundaries around communication, emotional availability, personal space, or decision-making. By clearly defining these limits, they prevent misunderstandings, reduce resentment, and ensure that both partners are aware of mutual responsibilities. Boundaries help transform chaotic, one-sided relationships into balanced partnerships where respect, empathy, and love coexist without depletion. At first, setting boundaries may feel uncomfortable. There is often resistance from the empath themselves, who may doubt their right to assert limits, and from the partner, who may be unaccustomed to receiving less than full access. But this discomfort is necessary growth. It is the moment where the super empath shifts from being reactive to proactive, from living on autopilot to living with intention. This is the pivot point where self-love intersects with relational health, creating a space where both partners can flourish without fear, guilt, or constant compromise. Over time, boundaries do more than protect. They empower. They transform the empath's relationship with themselves and with others. By enforcing boundaries, a super empath sends a silent but powerful message. I am responsible for my well-being, and I will not allow it to be compromised. This clarity encourages mutual respect and opens the door for more authentic connection. People learn that love is not a tool to be taken for granted, and that trust, commitment, and presence must be earned through conscious effort. Ultimately, boundaries allow a super empath to operate from a place of strength rather than depletion. They preserve emotional energy, maintain mental clarity, and reinforce the importance of self-respect in every interaction. Through boundaries, a super empath transforms their relationships, ensuring that love is not only given freely, but also received with awareness, care, and balance. It is the invisible architecture that supports both personal integrity and relational harmony, and without it, even the deepest love risks being diminished by imbalance, exhaustion, and misunderstanding. A super empath sets boundaries. The entire dynamic of a relationship begins to shift, often in ways that are subtle at first, but ultimately profound. Relationships thrive on patterns, routines, and unspoken understandings. And when a super empath has previously given endlessly without limits, those patterns become deeply ingrained. The relationship unconsciously adapts to the empath's constant availability, their willingness to absorb emotional labor, and their tendency to prioritize others over themselves. When boundaries suddenly appear, the relationship is forced to confront the reality of those patterns. The absence of unlimited availability creates space for authenticity to emerge, for both partners to reflect on their own behavior, and for the relationship to either evolve or reveal its weaknesses. Boundaries act as a mirror, reflecting the true intentions, priorities, and values of the people involved. When the super empath pauses, says no, or asks for their needs to be respected, it becomes immediately clear who is willing to rise to the OCC. Asian and who is not. Some people will respond with respect, empathy, and accountability. They will adjust their behavior, communicate more clearly, and contribute to the relationship in a balanced way. These individuals recognize that boundaries are not punitive. They are a demonstration of self-awareness and emotional intelligence. They understand that when one person nurtures their own well-being, the relationship as a whole benefits. In these cases, boundaries become catalysts for growth, deepening intimacy and strengthening trust. However, the appearance of boundaries can also expose imbalance and dishonesty. In relationships that relied on the super empath's limitless giving, the sudden assertion of limits can create tension, resistance, or even anger. Those who were accustomed to unchecked access may perceive the boundary as rejection or criticism, rather than a natural and necessary adjustment. They may label the empath as cold, changed, or difficult, but the underlying truth is that the relationship had never been balanced in the first place. The empath's boundaries do not create the conflict. The absence of prior boundaries did. In this way, boundaries act as a test of authenticity and commitment, forcing the relationship to evolve or collapse under the weight of its previous imbalances. Another important effect of boundaries is the creation of clarity in communication. When a super empath establishes limits, they are no longer subject to constant emotional interpretation or over-explanation. They do not feel compelled to explain away every action, accommodate every mood swing, or provide continuous reassurance at the expense of their own mental and emotional energy. This clarity removes ambiguity, reduces misunderstandings, and encourages both partners to take responsibility for their behavior. The empath becomes more selective about where and how they invest their energy, and the other person must rise to the level of accountability that has been established. In this sense, boundaries serve as a framework for healthier interactions, preventing recurring patterns of frustration, resentment, and imbalance. The shift also impacts the emotional atmosphere of the relationship. When boundaries are absent, tension often builds silently within the empath, resulting in subtle undercurrents of frustration, disappointment, or anxiety. When boundaries are enforced, these undercurrents are expressed proactively rather than explosively. The relationship becomes less reactive and more intentional. Both partners are forced to operate with mindfulness, considering how their actions affect one another rather than relying on the empath to absorb and compensate for everything. This change fosters mutual respect and encourages emotional growth on both sides. Ultimately, the appearance of boundaries transforms a relationship from one of dependency into one of mutual responsibility. The super empath is no longer the default caretaker of all emotional needs. Instead, both individuals are required to participate consciously, respectfully, and consistently. Boundaries illuminate what is sustainable and what is not, giving the relationship a chance to evolve into a healthier, more balanced dynamic. If it cannot, the relationship may fracture. But even in that scenario, the empath gains clarity, dignity, and self-respect, knowing that they will no longer compromise their well-being for the sake of maintaining an unhealthy dynamic. The truth revealed by boundaries is not always comfortable, but it is always necessary for genuine love, respect, and long-term connection. When a super empath sets boundaries, it is common to encounter resistance from the people around them. This resistance is rarely about the boundary itself. It is about the disruption of a dynamic that had long been comfortable, sometimes even taken for granted. For years, the empath may have been the constant emotional anchor, the one who forgave too quickly, gave endlessly, and absorbed stress and tension without complaint. Their availability was assumed, and their energy was relied upon, often unconsciously, as a stabilizing force in the relationship. When that steady, limitless presence suddenly changes, it can feel destabilizing for those who have grown used to taking it for granted. The reaction they display often reveals more about their own habits and expectations than about the empath's intentions. Resistance can take many forms. Sometimes it comes as confusion or shock, with phrases like, "You're being different," or "Why are you acting this way?" Other times, it may appear as guilt-tripping or emotional manipulation, designed to pull the empath back into their old pattern of constant giving. In some cases, it manifests as anger or frustration, framed as criticism, impatience, or withdrawal of affection. Each reaction is rooted in the discomfort of losing access to what was once freely available, the constant support, attention, and emotional labor the empath provided without hesitation. This discomfort is often perceived as a personal affront, even though the boundary itself is simply a measure of self-respect and emotional protection. For the super empath, witnessing this resistance can be challenging because it often triggers old habits, the desire to smooth things over, to explain, to justify, and to ensure that the other person remains comfortable. It can feel almost instinctual to respond, to reassure, and to re-enter the pattern of limitless availability. But boundaries are effective precisely because they resist that instinct. Maintaining them requires courage, self-awareness, and a commitment to the truth that protecting one's emotional well-being is not selfish, it is necessary. Without this consistency, the boundary loses power, and the dynamic reverts to the familiar pattern of imbalance. Resistance also serves as a form of feedback, highlighting whether a relationship is built on mutual respect or reliance on one-sided sacrifice. When the other person struggles with a boundary, it provides insight into their emotional maturity, willingness to adapt, and capacity for accountability. Those who are capable of self-reflection and growth will rise to meet the new expectations. They will learn to respect the empath's time, energy, and emotional needs. Understanding that a healthy relationship requires reciprocity and conscious effort. In these cases, boundaries can strengthen the bond, fostering deeper intimacy and a more balanced connection. On the other hand, resistance can reveal incompatibility or imbalance that has long been overlooked. If someone repeatedly disregards the empath's limits, complains about their assertiveness, or attempts to circumvent the boundaries, it becomes clear that the relationship was structured around the empath's overgiving. While this realization can be painful, it is also liberating. It allows the super empath to recognize relationships that are unsustainable, unhealthy, or dependent on one-sided effort. Resistance, in this sense, is not a punishment but a mirror, reflecting the true nature of the connection and encouraging the empath to prioritize alignment, respect, and mutual growth. Ultimately, encountering resistance when setting boundaries is a necessary part of the empath's evolution. It tests their commitment to self-care, clarity, and authenticity. It reveals the true intentions of those around them and creates an opportunity to redefine relational dynamics in a way that supports both partners. By standing firm, the super empath establishes a new standard, one where love is reciprocal, respect is non-negotiable, and emotional labor is shared rather than monopolized. Resistance may feel uncomfortable or even painful in the moment, but it is a critical signal that transformation is occurring, forcing both the empath and the relationship to confront truths that cannot be ignored if genuine connection is to thrive. When a super empath chooses themselves, it marks a profound shift in how they experience relationships, and it is one of the most transformative decisions they can make. For a long time, super empaths prioritize others, often to the point of neglecting their own needs, desires, and boundaries. They believe that love is proven through endurance, patience, and constant emotional availability. They measure their worth by how much they can give, how much they can absorb, and how much they can forgive. But over time, they begin to realize that this approach, while noble in intention, often leaves them depleted, unseen, and emotionally exhausted. Choosing themselves is not about rejecting others. It is about recognizing that their own well-being is just as important as the care they give to others. When a super empath begins to prioritize themselves, they start to redirect the energy that was once poured outward endlessly back inward. They ask themselves what they need, what makes them feel secure, respected, and valued. This is not a superficial act. It requires deep introspection and courage because it challenges patterns of self-sacrifice that may have been ingrained for years. They learn to recognize that taking care of their emotional health is not selfish, and that setting limits is not a rejection of love, but a statement of self-worth. It is a conscious decision to protect their energy, preserve their peace of mind, and maintain clarity in their own life. Choosing themselves changes how super empath HS interact with others. They become selective about where and with whom they invest their emotional energy. Instead of giving endlessly to anyone who asks, they invest in people who respect their boundaries, value their presence, and contribute to a balanced reciprocal dynamic. This selectivity is not about being closed off or rigid. It is about prioritizing connections that honor both parties equally. It allows the empath to experience relationships that are emotionally nourishing rather than draining. Partnerships where love is freely given and also consciously received. Another critical aspect of choosing themselves is the shift in their mindset regarding fear and attachment. Super empaths often fear loss, abandonment, or rejection, which keeps them trapped in patterns of overgiving. But once they choose themselves, they understand that losing someone who repeatedly disregards their boundaries or disrespects their emotional needs is not a failure. It is realignment. They no longer base their self-worth on whether someone stays or leaves. Instead, they anchor their confidence in their own integrity, self-respect, and the knowledge that they are deserving of mutual love and care. This internal shift reduces anxiety, increases emotional resilience, and allows them to approach relationships with clarity rather than fear. The act of choosing themselves also transforms the quality of love they give. Because they are no longer exhausted, overextended, or resentful, their empathy becomes intentional, balanced, and impactful. They can be fully present without being drained, offer support without sacrificing their own needs, and maintain emotional depth without losing themselves in the process. This creates healthier, more authentic connections where both partners feel seen, valued, and respected. Choosing oneself is not a withdrawal from love, it is an elevation of it. Setting a standard that love must be conscious, reciprocal, and aligned with personal integrity. Finally, choosing themselves empowers super empaths to live authentically. They become grounded, confident, and self-assured. They no longer chase validation or prove their worth through endless giving. Their love is no longer a transaction or a tool for approval. It is a deliberate, conscious expression that enhances the relationship without depleting their own well-being. This transformation is liberating. It allows them to experience love not as obligation, fear, or sacrifice, but as a balanced, nourishing, and mutually enriching connection. By choosing themselves, the super empath sets the foundation for sustainable relationships, personal growth, and a life that honors both their capacity to love and their right to be loved in return. When a super empath sets boundaries and fully embraces self-respect, they experience a profound transformation in how they relate to both themselves and others. This transformation begins internally, with a shift from reactive patterns to conscious choice. For years, super empaths operate on instinct, responding to the emotional needs of others almost automatically. They anticipate feelings, absorb tension, and adjust their own behavior to maintain harmony. While this ability to feel and respond deeply is a gift, it can come at the cost of their own emotional health, leading to exhaustion, resentment, and a diminished sense of self. By establishing boundaries, the empath interrupts this cycle, creating space to focus on their own emotional and mental well-being while still engaging meaningfully with others. Boundaries allow the super empath to reclaim their energy and time. Previously, every relationship interaction, whether a casual conversation or a significant conflict, might have drained them because they instinctively took responsibility for everyone else's feelings. With clear boundaries, they no longer automatically absorb other people's stress, guilt, or emotional turmoil. Instead, they assess when to engage, when to provide support, and when to step back. This creates a sustainable rhythm in relationships, where their empathy becomes a conscious choice rather than an exhausting default. Energy is no longer depleted in the service of others alone, but is balanced between giving and self-preservation. This newfound balance also leads to greater emotional clarity. Super empaths often struggle with distinguishing their own emotions from those of others. Over time, this can create confusion, anxiety, and difficulty making decisions based on personal needs. Boundaries act as a filter, helping the empath recognize what belongs to them and what belongs to someone else. They can respond to others without losing themselves, offering support without absorbing blame or guilt that is not theirs to carry. This clarity strengthens their confidence, allowing them to navigate relationships with a sense of autonomy and purpose that was previously missing. Setting boundaries also changes the way others interact with the empath. People quickly recognize that unlimited access and unquestioned availability are no longer options. This creates accountability and encourages mutual respect. Partners, friends, and family members are prompted to consider their own behavior, communicate more thoughtfully, and contribute equitably to the relationship. Boundaries establish expectations that were previously absent, reducing the likelihood of misunderstandings, resentment, and one-sided effort. Over time, the super empath observes a shift in relational dynamics. Relationships that are built on respect, reciprocity, and awareness flourish, while those reliant on imbalance naturally falter. Perhaps the most transformative effect is the internal empowerment that comes from standing firm. Super empaths often fear confrontation, rejection, or loss, which keeps them compliant and overgiving. When boundaries are set and maintained, they develop resilience and confidence. They learn that asserting their needs does not diminish their kindness or empathy. Instead, it reinforces their self-worth and signals to others that their emotional well-being is important. This internal shift fosters a sense of control over their own life and choices, which in turn reduces anxiety and increases emotional stability. Boundaries also allow super empaths to cultivate deeper, more meaningful connections. Relationships that were once superficial or transactional evolve into partnerships based on mutual understanding, respect, and conscious effort. The empath's energy is no longer scattered, and their attention is given intentionally, allowing for more authentic presence and deeper emotional resonance. The quality of love they offer improves because it is grounded in health, balance, and self-awareness rather than exhaustion or compulsion. Ultimately, embracing boundaries enables the super empath to lead a life that honors both their capacity for deep connection and their right to personal integrity. They no longer define themselves solely by what they give to others. Instead, they operate from a place of balance, clarity, and self-respect. By protecting their energy, asserting their needs, and maintaining healthy limits, they create relationships and experiences that are sustainable, nourishing, and empowering. This internal and external transformation reinforces the truth that empathy is most powerful when paired with boundaries, allowing love to exist without self-sacrifice and connection to thrive without compromise. In closing, when a super empath sets boundaries, they do close themselves off from love. They open the door to clarity, respect, and authentic connection. Boundaries are not walls, but bridges that allow relationships to flourish in balance while protecting the empath's emotional well-being and self-worth. By choosing themselves, standing firm, and honoring their own needs, they transform not only their own life, but the dynamics of every relationship they are in, creating space for mutual respect, growth, and genuine love. Thank you all for listening and allowing these insights to inspire you to honor your own heart and the connections that truly deserve it.